Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 198. So it has been an entire month since the last full episode of the podcast aired. And I'd just like to remind you that if you are missing out, if you feel like that's a long time to wait, there were actually 3 bonus episodes that happened in the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. We did a card pull one week. We talked a little bit more in depth about the trickster energy that had been bouncing around one week. And then one week was the bonus virtual sound journey that members of the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary receive monthly. So if that's something that calls to you, we would love to have you join us. We like to say we're small but mighty. And the type of people that tend to be attracted to this space tend to be introverts and tend to be neurodivergent and tend to have quantum origins and are exploring those. So there's space for interaction in the groups. There's a Facebook group as well as a group through my website, which is hosted by Wix. And then there are lots of bonus and exclusive discounts available as well. So they get discounts on one-on-one services, a specific type of services. They get discounts on all the activations, and then they get these bonus episodes of the podcast. And trying to do about a monthly virtual meetup as well, where we just hop on a Google Meet and talk about whatever comes up and share space. And last month we talked a lot about what it looks like to build this new community, this 5D community of mutual aid and holding space for each other, and how do we do that while we're still kind of functioning in a 3D world. And it was a really beautiful and deep session. So if that's something that calls to you, the link is always in the podcast show notes. We'd love to have you check it out. You can always try it and decide it's not for you. So today we're talking about quantum healing with your inner child. And I'm laughing a little bit because it's been so long. The last show I did, I was actually still in Santa Barbara, and so many things happened to me there and since then that it feels a little bit like it's been a year, not a month. So I'm kind of chuckling to myself because I'm thinking about just trying to make all of this coherent and sensical. I don't know if that's a word. But what I will say first is that I've talked about inner child healing quite a bit on the show. There are some older episodes that actually had guided meditation activations for inner child work. I've been doing inner child work for a really long time, and I've been doing it in this quantum healing way that I realize I never talked directly about exactly what this is, and it's coming up a lot right now. There's some really old stuff coming up for people. And using this technique of quantum healing with your inner child or inner children, I have just found to be such an effective and powerful way to shift out of some of these really old patterns that we have a hard time moving through. I've got a little reverse dog sneeze confirmation in the background here. So I'm going to do this a little different than I usually do. I absolutely have a story, and hopefully it will make sense as I try to weave some of all of these pieces together into a cohesive whole. But I'm going to talk a little bit about like the mechanics of this and what this is and why I do this, like the energetic kind of anatomy of this. And I was listening on the way back. We just got back from Mexico, and on the way back we were listening to, I believe it was episode 20 of the talk tracks, the telepathy tapes. If you have not listened to the telepathy tapes, I would highly recommend it. It talks a lot about they call them psi gifts, but what I call intuitive gifts. We're going to be talking more about that today. And this is something that comes up a lot in my work, and it's just really interesting to hear other perspectives. And one of the things they were talking about on this particular episode was kind of like how the brain works and what intuition is, and how quantum kind of the quantum idea of time and how we can actually affect on a quantum level, not just the future, but the past and what that looks like. And there was a gentleman on there who was just talking in a really eloquent way about kind of his view of this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my view of this, but I think it's always helpful to have other points of view. And I just always find that to be a really excellent resource. So I've been doing this type of quantum healing with the inner child for years and years and years, and maybe not having the words for it quite exactly as I do now, and the idea of this quantum space and how and why this works. And so one of the first things I'm going to say is that the quantum space is a place that actually exists. And this is something that I explain to people a lot in one-on-one sessions, because sometimes it's a little bit like, it feels like we're just imagining this, doing this work in my imagination. And that is somewhat true. This is something that we're doing kind of in an abstract way, although I'm going to give you some concrete examples of this in the story that I tell today. But we're doing this sort of work in this space of our imagination. The difference between the imagination and the quantum is there's a very gray, like sort of not clear line there. And I think the biggest difference is sort of intention and depth. Sometimes we're just fantasizing and we're just thinking about things, and there's no real depth to that. It's just sort of like fun to think about, you know, what might life be like if I was a famous musician, let's say, and I could go down that road and sort of picture what that might be like. And that's a useful kind of, it's a useful tool sometimes to just get out of my head a little bit, or to get into a space of play and joy and bring some more fun into my life. So that is already kind of quantum work. When it becomes like this deeper quantum work is when we're doing this with a clear intention to make shift in the quantum field, and the understanding that the quantum field is a real place that exists. Even if it's not a place we can physically visit or physically be in, the understanding that the quantum space physically exists brings like a depth to this work that is beyond just this idea of I'm sort of envisioning this or imagining this. It's essentially this idea of how we influence the outcome of an experiment as an observer. And they've done studies on this in the quantum physics to show that it's true. So one of the things this guy was saying on the episode of the talk tapes I was listening to, he was talking a little bit about time and this idea of like how we can actually affect the past and the future, and like his view of what that kind of means exactly. And there's been studies about this where they've shown that, like, there was a study, and this is in one of the Joe Dispenza books, he talks about these people were asked to sort of set intention or pray for a specific outcome for these people with fevers to have a better outcome to heal. And the results were statistically significant, and what the people didn't realize, or what they didn't find out till later, was that they were actually praying for something that had happened in the past. It was like the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak or something. It was something that had happened in the past that they were praying for in the present that actually affected, statistically significantly affected the results of what happened in the past. And I think that's sort of a way of understanding this idea of the fact that in the quantum space, there is no time. So I talk about a lot this idea of like what source is. Like source is the light, the love, the unconditional space from which everything else comes. And in order to kind of experience it itself, source started differentiating what not source is, because it's hard to know what you are without this contrast, this understanding of, oh, this is what I'm not. That helps me understand what I am. So in that space of source, in this pure quantum space of source, there is no time. There is no time. There's no past, there's no present, there's no future. Everything is happening in the now. Even one differentiation removed from that, which is the seraphim space, time exists. As soon as we differentiate out and there is an aspect of source that is not source, that is when linear time starts to appear. And so even in the seraphim realm, which is just one space removed from source itself, there is linear time. There is the time before the seraphim existed, when source was just source. And there is the passage of time into which I imagine eventually perhaps everything comes back into source and the seraphim maybe no longer exist. The experience of time for seraphim beings is completely different than ours. It's so slow compared to the passage of time for us that the linearity almost doesn't seem to exist. But as soon as we differentiate out from source, there is this experience of linear time. And that sometimes people ask me, how does this make sense when you're talking about the past or the future or before or now or then? And I think it's helpful to understand that the only place that time really truly doesn't exist is in this like quantum space of oneness. And as soon as we come out of oneness, even slightly, even the first degree out from that oneness, there is a linearity of time. Now, again, time in that space passes completely differently than it does for us. One of the gifts and sort of difficulties of being human is that we're in a very linear space of time. Time seems to be very set. It seems to move. It used to seem to move in a pretty set way. I think most people in the last couple of years are realizing it's not nearly as linear even for us as it seems. And that is because we are accessing more of our quantum space. The further into the quantum space we get, the further expanded, the further clarified, expanded, and harmonious we get, the more that passage of time seems to be less predictable and less linear, because we start to access this closer experience of non-time. We get closer to that quantum experience of everything being in the now. And because in the quantum space, time moves differently, and in the true quantum space, there is no past, present, and future. When we do quantum work with our linear human view of, like, I'm working on the past or I'm working on the future, we absolutely can influence what happens in the now based on what happened in the past or based on what happens in the future. And in the talk tapes, this gentleman did a really beautiful, like, concise way of sort of summarizing this idea that, like, if you think about the past as almost like an idea, because it's already happened, so we have memories of the past, we have an idea of what the past is. If we change that idea from our current view, we maybe don't change what happened physically in the past, but we change our idea, our viewpoint of that. That affects how we are in the present. And I've seen this for years with trauma healing work. When I work with an inner child version of myself to help them through a trauma, to give them tools in the moment for the trauma, it helps heal me in the present. Even if I haven't changed the physical circumstances of the past, I have changed the quantum, and that changes me. It also changes the experience for the inner child. This is why this is so important. And in turn, both of those things change how we experience the future, because then we are moving into the future with more clarity, expansion, and harmony. This is why I have goosebumps over my whole body. This is why this quantum healing with the inner child is such powerful and potent and important work. And I believe, especially when we're talking about releasing old trauma stuff, and this could be this life, you can do this in past lives, you can do this generationally. We're going to focus on this life and our inner child for this life. But all of this is why this quantum healing work works when other things do not, because we are addressing the source of the issue. It's not a band-aid. We're not just in the mental sort of like ruminating about it. It's like we're actually shifting the quantum energy of this. And in that way, it affects, again, it makes things better for the inner child. We're going to talk about that in today's kind of illustration example. It makes things better for us. And then it also opens space in the future for more clarity, expansion, and harmony. And so in this way, when we're working in the quantum, we truly can change the past. And again, it's not that we've changed the specific physical things that happened in the past. It's more we've changed the experience of the past for that version of ourselves, which helps change the experience that we're having in the present, which actually somatically can clear things out of the body. This is why this is such powerful somatic healing work. I've been doing somatic healing work since the beginning of my bodywork career back in 2003, not having necessarily, again, the language for it that I do now. This is how we release some of the things that are held in our body that have been there for such a long time, is through this kind of quantum healing work. So what I'm going to do today, hopefully in a way that makes sense, I'm going to talk about this I'm going to tell you a story, and we're going to talk about how you can do this in a metaphorical way, in like more of a symbolic kind of journeying way, like a shamanic journey type way. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do this in a more kind of concrete way, and how all of these things work together to shift things not just for you, your present and future self, but for the actual past selves. So I'm going to start when I was in Santa Barbara. I'm going to talk a little bit about this cacao journey that I went on, to kind of talk about the metaphorical aspect of this. And let me just give you an overview of sort of what I'm talking about. And I think that'll help to make it a little bit clearer. I'm doing the thing where I have all this hindsight of, all these things happen, and now I can see where they kind of come together and integrate. And at the time, as I was experiencing this, I was just trusting that this journey was taking me somewhere. But I set this intention probably at the beginning of this year to start reopening my third eye space, which is the sort of space that gives you access to your intuitive gifts. And you might be like, Paula, you have a lot of intuitive gifts. You talk about them a lot. This is true. And I had way more access to gifts as a very young child that I know that I shut down because I was afraid of them than I do now. And as this process of opening and unfolding my gifts in my present and for my future self involves kind of going back and realizing just how powerful these gifts were when I was a young child, and also just how scary the experiences I had around these gifts were. So I've been doing this work kind of with intention all year, and it's been a really interesting process, and it's been a little bit of sort of like a step or two forward and a few steps back. And it's really been a process of patience, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because when you're working with your inner children, there's this saying that used to drive me crazy. You can only go as fast as the slowest part of you. And especially when you're working with the very young version of your inner child, they do not have the adult understanding that you have. That is one of the ways that you can bring healing to them, is to help them gain some understanding of something that as an adult you can say, oh, I see this and I see this and I see this. But as that child version, you did not have that broader view. It's like you were missing the forest for the trees a little bit. And sometimes our brains aren't developed in a way that we understand things. And so holding space for your inner child from this idea, there's also the term reparenting. A lot of this is a little bit of a reparenting view of like, my child didn't receive what they needed at the time. I am going to give that to them now. I am going to be the parent that they needed in that moment. And I'm going to give them whatever it is. Sometimes it's a hug, sometimes it's a gift, sometimes it's a safe space, sometimes it's a combination of all those things. But it's very empowering work when you realize that you can give your children, your inner child, what they needed in the time that they didn't get. And this can be done completely without judgment. This is not saying that your parents were bad or that they didn't do what you needed to do in the moment because of any dark reason. Everyone is doing the best they can in the moment with the information that they are given. And this example that I'm going to talk about today is a perfect example of this, because I tried to explain to my parents these experiences that I was having as a child, and they just didn't understand me. It just didn't make sense. It did not fall into their worldview. They did not have people. Sometimes I think now don't understand, like even 20 years ago when I started doing this, nobody knew what Reiki was. People didn't talk about energy. The entire worldview of the spiritual was held through the lens of religiosity for a very long time. And so when you're a very young child and you're telling, like I used to tell my mom, I don't like going to sleep because I feel like I'm being pulled down a dark tunnel and it's scary. Like she just thought, and we talked about this the other day again, she said, I just thought you were having a fever dream, because I had a lot of fevers as a kid. And I had what they assumed was a very vivid imagination. And it just was not in their worldview to recognize that these things were really happening to me, because they couldn't see them. And I think we have a lot more understanding of that now, that especially things like the telepathy tapes are out. And it's like, oh, these things are actually being scientifically proven to be real. And we can hold space for the fact that maybe we're not experiencing them, but someone else is. And what can we do to support them? But it wasn't like a failing on their part. They just honestly, like, they didn't know that it was real. And I was too young to express to them that it was real. And even if they knew, I'm not sure they would have known how to hold space, because they're not me. They're not having the experience that I have had. that's another reason why this like reparenting and holding quantum healing space for your inner child is most potent when it comes from you, because you're the one who knows exactly what you needed in that moment. You're the only one probably who knows exactly what you needed, and you can give it to yourself. So I went to this cacao ceremony in Santa Barbara, and I had no expectations. I was kind of doing a lot of stuff, and there was some inner child stuff coming up. And I will just preface this by saying I had received some body work a day or two before this, where I received a new guide, and it was a lion. And this is important for the story. This big, beautiful, like it first came through, this big, beautiful kind of male lion with this huge mane came through and sort of said, I'm your earth guide. I'm here to help you with this work that you're doing kind of around healing your physical existence, like on the earth itself. And I thought that was really beautiful and amazing, because I have a lot of guides in the quantum, but I haven't really had an earth guide up until now. I didn't really feel like I had a spirit animal necessarily. So I went to this cacao ceremony just kind of with an open mind and sort of open to wherever the journey took me. And so as I started kind of into this journey, the woman who was leading this was doing this beautiful job of sort of doing a guided meditation. And very quickly it was like, oh no, you're not going there. You're doing your own thing. And the lion showed up. This lion showed up and was like, kind of like, follow me, come with me. And I was like, well, okay, like, of course I'm going to follow you. Take me where I need to go. And so at first it was just me following this line, and it led me into this kind of cave. And I realized pretty quickly I was in like what I call the cave of the body, like the solar plexus kind of sacral area. And this is an area that for a lot of people, especially at first, is really scary because it seems really dark and we're not really encouraged to go into that space. But I've done a lot of work there. So right away I was like, oh yeah, this is my cozy cave. This is great. I love this space. And right away, all of these inner children versions of myself sort of came forward. And then a whole family of lions came forward. And it was funny because the lioness sort of stepped forward and said, I send him as my ceremonial sort of symbol, but I'm the one with the power. Like, this family is mine. I'm the matriarch of this family. And it was a really beautiful moment of like realizing that the divine masculine reflects the divine feminine, and that as she's moving the energy, he's sort of reflecting that, and she's holding the space of receiving and he's holding the space of being active. So she was the one who directed him essentially to come to me in the first place, and then to bring me into this cave. So first we were just in this cave, and it was just really beautiful, and it felt really like safe, and like I was coming home in a way that was just really loving. And it was like we're going to go on a journey, and we've got to bring all of these versions of yourself with us, and we've got to be respectful of what they need along the way. That's kind of how this was coming through in these, just sort of impressions or visions or whatever. So we started, and we were kind of walking through this journey that I'm not going to go into because that would take a lot of time, but it became clear to me that we were headed somewhere. And along the way, we had to kind of stop and take time for all of these slower versions of myself to catch up. And it was one of the first times that I've been in this experience of really recognizing the power of that idea, that you can only go as fast as the slowest part of you. So near the end of this journey, we came to this big, beautiful portal. It was like a big stone sort of portal opening. And through it, I could see this really amazing, like green, verdant looking jungle. And we kind of all stopped, and it was very clear. It was like, we're leaving this like sanctity of the cave. We're moving out of the cave, and we're moving into the third eye. This is your third eye. And so we kind of all stopped, and I could feel that there was a lot of fear in these inner child versions of myself. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get into the concrete stuff about like what these fears were and what these experiences were that I was having that made me so fearful. But in this sort of metaphoric space, it was like, okay, I'm being asked to walk through this door into whatever is going to open this space that's going to bring me closer to what I've been asking for, which is kind of reactivating some of these gifts. And I'm being asked to do it in a way that is loving and respectful of the fear that these inner children, these younger versions of myself have. And so I stopped and I said to all these versions of myself, these were like an infant up to like teenage age, like all different ages. And I said, all right, we're not going to walk through this door until everyone is ready. And if that means that we don't do that today, like before this journey is over, in the cacao ceremony that I was in, I was like, that's okay. There's no rush. And the beautiful thing about holding that space is that that is what allowed them to be able to move forward. The fact that I stopped trying to push them. I have spent a lot of my life pushing myself in lots of ways and not having a lot of patience, especially for myself. That gets reflected out, but especially for myself. And so this was a really kind of revolutionary shift for me of just being like, we are going to be in the space that we're in. Dog confirmation in the background. I apologize for that. And it's confirmation, so it is what it is. So I feel like this is, I'm being asked to restate the importance of this as part of this journey. When you're working with, especially very young versions of yourself, the most powerful way to work with them is at their pace. And that can feel a little bit frustrating from an adult viewpoint. You know, it can be like, why don't you just see this? Look at this beautiful verdant green jungle. Of course it's a safe space. Let's just walk into there. And you are absolutely doing your current self a disservice by not allowing for the safety and the space that the inner child is needing. So thank you for that confirmation. So as I decided to wait, the most beautiful thing happened. And what I saw was that all these versions of myself and these beautiful earth guides, these lions, began to take care of each other. As I sort of stood at the head and waited and just said, we're not going until everyone is ready. Some of the older versions of me, like the teenage version of me, like picked up the infant and was holding her and like making her feel safe. And then some of the kind of toddler age versions of myself, like they climbed up onto the adult lions' backs, and so they were going to be carried. And then some of the older child versions of me picked up lion cubs, and that made them feel safe. And so we gathered in this way for what felt like a long time, but was really probably just a couple of minutes of like really arriving in a place that felt safe to move forward. And it was just beautiful to watch. I didn't do anything. I just waited. I just said, I'm waiting till everyone is ready. And then they began to take care of themselves and each other. And that is the other power of this work, is that sometimes we introduce all of these different versions of our younger selves, and the older self is taking care of the younger self, and the younger self is holding space for the older self. And so by just getting out of the way and allowing this quantum energy to move, then it was like, now we're ready. And so we walked into this beautiful jungle, and that was kind of the end of the journey. There was this just like really moment of like peace and joy and love, and sort of just being in that space of again, also really honoring my need for slowness, my need for waiting until all of me is ready before I jump into the next thing. This is going to come through in the rest of the story as well. There's a theme here. So that's kind of that's a metaphoric way that you can work with your inner children, is this like more of like a shamanic journey. It's like, you know, I'm going into this place that represents an aspect of myself through this journey, like through this cave and into this journey of this portal that represented my third eye. So that's kind of a metaphoric way to do this. And I work with all of these methods when I work with people one-on-one. And I think it's helpful to understand there's no wrong or right way to do this. And sometimes people resonate more with one than another. And I resonate with different things at different times, which is partly why I'm telling this particular story today. So the result of stepping more into my third eye was total and utter fear, just being completely terrified. Even though in that moment it felt safe and we were ready to do that, that's the other thing to understand, is that this work we're opening space. And every time we open space, there's more things that come up. It's excavation. So I dug down deep enough to be able to walk into the third eye. And once I got there, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, here are all the things that I have been afraid of. And so that's when I started working more directly and concretely with my inner children. So in my quantum space, there is a version of my childhood bedroom that I go to a lot, depending on the age of the child I'm working with. This is like a representative space of sometimes fear, sometimes safety, sometimes what needs to be moved through. So I've been spending a lot of time in this space with different ages, different versions of myself, from infant all the way up to, at this point, I would say like 6 or 7 or 8. And what I started doing, first of all, I was just feeling a lot of the fear and sort of like, oh God, this is too much. And what did I do? What did I get myself into? And also I asked for this, and this is part of my journey. And this is a big part of this too. This is why it's really important to do this work with support. I've been doing this a long time. And along the way, like that cacao ceremony was led by someone. I had another session with my provider here where a lot of this like inner child stuff kind of came out. So this work is difficult to do without some sort of support, even if it's just somebody sort of holding space for you, somebody guiding you along the way. Because it is, the deeper you excavate, the scarier the things are that come up. So I've been dealing with this essentially like existential fear of these childhood versions of myself that saw things, experienced things, and just did not understand what they were and found them to be incredibly frightening. And so I've been spending a lot of time now in this more like concrete space. It's still a quantum space, but it's like I'm in the actual memory. What was it that was scaring me so much? And I go to like the infant version of myself. And I think I've told this story on the podcast before. And now I recognize that I was hearing thoughts as a young child. And so sometimes what I thought people were saying out loud, I think they were just thinking in their head. And I think I've told this story about being a baby in the incubator, and the nurse, I thought she said it to the other nurse, but now I'm like, maybe she just thought, I don't want to pick that one up. She's too loud. And receiving that as this like sort of judgment of how loud I was, even, days within a day or two of being born. And that's very scary too, because as a child, as an adult, I understand. I have thoughts all the time that I don't really mean, or that aren't, I get annoyed with people. I get annoyed with my husband, and I'm like, I'm going to punch you in the face or whatever. And, I'm not actually going to do that. It's like the emotion being expressed through a thought. But as a very young child, and especially like an infant, like your brain is not wired for that depth of understanding, that level of understanding. So I realized, and also as an autistic child, I took everything literally. So when like my mom came into the room and she was angry about something, or she was frustrated because it was the 15th time she'd have to come in because I was crying all night long or whatever, I would hear those thoughts and feel those emotions and like take them very literally. Like, oh, she hates me. She doesn't want me here. She wishes she never had me, whatever it was. And like as an adult, you can look at that and say, oh, well, even if she was thinking those thoughts or feeling that way in that moment, that's just an expression of frustration. That's just an expression of, fatigue. And I didn't understand that. You don't have the like capacity to understand that in these childhood forms. And that's another way this can be helpful, is to like hold the space for your inner child to understand, like, yes, you receive that, and validate the experience. That's very important. I understand it was really scary when someone would come into the room and you could see their anger. I realize now I could see it. Like I was getting this vision of Pigpen from the Peanuts with the like cloud of dust around him. So when somebody would come into my room to pick me up as a baby, I could tell if they were happy or sad or mad or whatever, based on the color I was seeing around them. I would see this dark cloud, or I would see like a white cloud. And again, everybody is angry sometimes. Like, it doesn't mean that there was evil or badness coming in. It means that I didn't have the understanding beyond like, this person's unhappy and they're going to pick me up and now I feel scared. This person I feel this person's love and they're going to pick me up and now I feel loved. And of course it's the same person a lot of times. And that's confusing to a child as well, because we don't have the complexity to understand, like we don't have the cortex development to understand like nuance and complexity as children. So holding this space as an adult, like, so some of this is just me like validating the experience of the child and seeing what it looked like, and then being like, oh my gosh, that is so scary to have someone come in with this big dark cloud around them. Of course you thought that something terrible was going to happen, and your nervous system developed to be in this sympathetic response all the time. That makes complete sense. So part of this work is just validation. Seeing there was a toddler version of myself. I can remember like holding, so I was old enough to stand and kind of hold at the edge of the crib and looking into this portal where I would see, and this is another thing I kept trying to explain to my mom when I was old enough to talk, that like things looked very far away, but they were very big. Like the perspective was off when I looked into this portal, and I realized now like I was looking into another dimension, and I didn't understand. I just knew it looked wrong. And so it was scary because, again, as a child, you're very defenseless. You're really dependent on your caregivers to take care of you. And when, I was having these experiences that I couldn't even articulate to my caregivers because a lot of them happened before I could speak. So, you're crying and you're screaming and they don't know why. And later when I was old enough to try to explain it, like, again, my parents, like, they didn't have the worldview to understand, like, to go like, oh, maybe she's actually seeing something that's actually there. It was just like, oh, you're having a nightmare, you're asleep. And I remember I kept saying, no, my eyes are open. Like, I'm seeing this with my eyes open. And that is incredibly scary. And when I did fall asleep, I still do this. My conscious mind can be awake while my body is asleep. And so it felt like I was being pulled down a dark tunnel. And so I developed sleep problems from a very early age because we're pretty naturally afraid of the dark as children. It's like part of our primal instinct is to be afraid of the dark because then you can't see the predators coming. And so I started having a lot of fear around this stuff from a very early age that, again, I couldn't articulate. So I've been working with these versions of myself, holding this space. And then comes the quantum healing part, because it's not enough to just do the validation. That's really important. What you can do in the quantum is shift the actual experience. This is where the power of the quantum healing lies. I can't change the physical experience, but I can shift the quantum experience, and I can give these young versions of myself less fearful ways to understand what's happening. And I can actually shift the feeling of the experience so that I did this so well that they don't have any fear anymore. Now I do. This is the ironic part of this story that we'll get to. So what I started doing was working with all these versions of myself, just first seeing what was there, asking them to tell me about it, listening to them, saying, I understand, and I know this was really happening, and I recognize how scary this was for you. This was completely scary. No wonder you're afraid to go back into this space where this stuff is going to be opened up. And then the next step is like, what can I do about this? How can I make you feel safer? How can I hold a space that feels less frightening for you? And I will say in this case, these things were so frightening that I was a little bit at a loss as to how to do this. And I had to kind of work with myself like I would work with someone else. And I was like, well, if we're afraid of the dark, what I'm going to do is flood this space with light. And so I started calling in all my angels to stand in the room with all these versions of myself and like let their swords glow and just fill the space with light. And I started in the portal that the toddler version of me was seeing through, where she was seeing through to like this lizard dimension that was scary, and like she can see any dimension. So I set that portal to show her the celestial realm, to show her the seraphim space, which is where we came from. And right away, what felt very scary and unable to be understood became this like, this is a soothing place for you to look. Look in and remember the Crystal Cathedral. Remember where you came from. Remember the seraphim light, because the light is what makes you feel comfortable. And it's very interesting. I spent a lot of my career and the show talking about how dark is not inherently bad and light is not inherently good. And in this particular situation, what my inner children needed was more light, literally more light, so that when they saw these things, first of all, they felt supported. They felt like they weren't alone. So the lions came in, and the lions are sleeping with all these versions of myself to protect them. One of the things my parents did, because I had such terrible nightmares, which I think some of them were astral experiences, not nightmares, was I was very into stuffed animals, and they gave me this stuffed octopus named Ollie the octopus, and they said, Ollie's going to protect you from your nightmares. And I have, now that I've connected this memory a long time ago. Like Archangel Michael would actually like be in Ollie to protect me, because even at a certain point, everything scared me. Everything I saw that wasn't real scared me because I just didn't understand it. So even when Michael came, at a certain point, like that felt scary to me because it was like I just was seeing so many things I didn't understand, and I couldn't tell the difference between what was quote unquote good and what was quote unquote bad. And like from an adult perspective, it's like a lot of these things were probably neutral, but because they felt dark or because they didn't have the understanding to grasp them, they just felt evil or scary or bad or dark or whatever words you want to use for that. And there were some like lizard energy stuff coming in, and I've done a whole show where I talked about that, and trickster energy and like all of that. Like this is the thing with the quantum. It's always a yes and. Yes, it was probably not as bad as I experienced at that time. And there were some sort of denser energies that I was seeing that were probably threatening to me, and that did in fact like infect me, like in the story I told in What's the Deal with Lizard Energy. And I have since gone back, and even in that situation, the lions are at the table when that guy grabs my arm. The angels are all around me when I had that experience with my uncle where he choked me. I can go back in the quantum and give those versions of myself what they needed in the moment. And it doesn't change the physical experience of it, but it changes the emotional experience of it. It changes the quantum experience of it. It changes the energetic experience of it. So that, yes, I did have all of these envenomations that I had to work through and that I had to release in this last couple of years. And I can heal not just the current version of me, but all of those versions leading back. This is how generational work works as well. This is how past life works as well. So I have been flooding this space with light and giving all of these versions of myself exactly what they need, to the point that after I got back, was in an experience the other day where I was receiving a massage, and I sort of went back to the jungle, and I was like, all right, it's time to go back in. Everybody feels like a lot less scared. Let's go back. Let's like go a little deeper into the jungle and see what we see. And like, maybe it's not as scary as we think. And it was very dense and kind of dark. And, you know, it was like such a densely packed jungle that there was no light coming in. And then this man stepped forward, and he was a shaman. And I realized he was my grandfather in my very first human life that I talked about in the Trickster episodes, where I was a medicine woman in Peru. He's the one who trained me. He was my grandfather in that life. And he stepped forward and said, I'm here to guide you back to your pineal gland, essentially, which is the receiver and the, it's both a receiver and a, oh my gosh, it gives and receives. My brain's not working today. What is the word for that? Anyway, it gives out frequency and it receives frequency. And it is where these so-called psi gifts, or it's the beacon from which these things sort of come and are received. And mine has been covered purposely. I did that purposely because I was scared and I didn't want to have those experiences anymore. And over the years, it's been, you know, kind of opening a little bit, but it's been unable to be completely uncovered because I would have been completely overwhelmed by that experience because of all this stuff. So I went back into this jungle, and the shaman sort of led us to what I realized it was this light. It was kind of like a fire, but it was like covered in all this stone. And it was like, this is your pineal gland, and you need to start kind of chipping away at this stone. And it was like, you know, well, not until everyone's ready, not until the children are ready. And so by the end of that session, they were like having it. It was like hitting a piñata. They were all like swinging things, and there was like music and drums, and the shaman was there holding space. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. It seems like you guys are great. And I sort of just left them there. And that's another way that this work happens, is that it's in the quantum. So when you have support in the quantum and things are continuing, you can kind of let that simmer. Essentially, you can let that go on, and you can go back to doing, because you have to have your everyday life too, right? So it was like, oh, I'm going to leave this as it is. And they've done such a good job now that now they're waiting on me. When I go back and check in, they're like, is it time? Is it time? Is it time? Can we uncover it? Like, they are super excited. They're ready. I did such a good job of giving them what they needed in those moments through my childhood that now they're waiting on me. And I just think that that is so ironic, and I can't do anything but laugh at that, because I have spent a lot of my life frustrated with those versions of myself holding me back, so-called holding me back. And now I've got to be ready in the now. And because it's going to shift my future so much, it feels like a lot in the now. And it's okay. I don't have to do it with any great urgency. I can let them, they're having a great time. Every time I check in, they're just like dancing and they're singing, and I can feel the light like pulsing from the pineal gland, and I can see light kind of coming out. And again, maybe it doesn't have to be something where it blows up and all the light comes back at once. Maybe they are just singing life back into this space, and as it sort of pulsates more and more, though the shell that's around it can fall away in a way that feels less scary to me, because they're not scared anymore. I am. And that's a really beautiful illustration of how powerful this work is, and also how quickly it can be done. I said I've been working on this like through this entire year, and that is true. And sometimes this old stuff takes a while, but the time from which like I met the lions to now is like a month. So in the last month, I have taken years of this fear and confusion, that's the word, muddiness around these gifts that I then shut down, and completely reversed that. And this was going on. I shut my light language down when I was 16. So this was going on. And I can see points along the journey now, like, oh yeah, when I was 6 or 7, I could still read my dad's thoughts, and I could tell he was angry at me. We found a journal where I was writing like, my daddy hates me and he's so angry. Now I understand he was upset when I stopped wanting to ride on the motorcycle with him. And we had this whole long discussion, since he has transitioned, where he was really hurt and he didn't understand why that happened. And then I got to explain why that happened, and then he got to receive it. And like, but as a child of 6 or 7, I just didn't understand why my dad was so angry at me. And like, he probably didn't either. But you don't expect that people can read your thoughts. We think that our inner world is, it should be sacred. It should not be invaded without permission. And again, as a child, like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that wasn't okay. And for a lot of neurodivergent and intuitive children, we come in and experience a lot of trauma. I think that's actually by design. And those psi gifts, those intuitive gifts, are part of our survival mechanism. So if I could read somebody's thoughts, then I would know, like, oh, is dad mad today? Maybe I won't go. Maybe I'll stay away. Has dad been drinking? Maybe I'll stay away. So in a relatively short period of time, I have completely shifted this thing that foundationally changed who I became as a person in a way that it was meant to. This is the other thing that's really interesting. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I would not be here talking to you right now, having these realizations. So part of this work too is about letting go of regret. Because sometimes it's like, oh, God, why couldn't I have done that in the moment? Why didn't I do this sooner? I could have been doing this years ago. And like understanding again that in the quantum, there is no time, and that you are in divine timing when you are doing this work. I can see that if I'd had these gifts and they weren't shut down, I would not be sitting here now. I don't know where I would be. I have a sense that it would be someplace that didn't feel so good to me. And that's enough for me. I don't need to go down that road. I've gone down the road that led me into the quantum version of who I am in this moment, and is leading to the quantum version of who I will be in the future. And I'm doing it with intention, and I'm doing it with love, and I'm doing it with patience. And that is a revolution, to treat yourself kindly and to do this with patience. And now to be in this space where they're waiting on me and like, they don't care. They're having a great time. They're in the quantum. There is no time for them. They exist in any space they want to be in now. And now every time I go to that room, it is filled with light. It is overflowing with light. And some of this is just me receiving and integrating this, because I still hold the darkness, the experience of the darkness in this physical, quantum, emotional body. And this work sometimes takes time to integrate. And as it integrates, it shifts things in a quantum way, energetically, and also at a quantum speed. Again, to do all this like in a month. And like, I don't know how much longer it'll take me to kind of uncover this, but it will be by the end of the year. I already know that. I knew that at the beginning of this year, that was what my journey was for this year. And what if it's January 3rd? That's okay too. So a lot of this quantum healing with your inner children is giving themselves what they needed in the moment, which then allows you to give yourself what you need now, which is the same thing you needed then. Understanding, safety, space, time, patience. This is not a sprint. This spiritual work is a marathon. And especially right now where there is so much shifting so quickly, I see a lot of this reflected in like the comments and stuff that I get on TikTok and YouTube. Like, I feel like I'm being left behind. Everyone else says they're feeling this and I'm feeling this and da 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 da. That doesn't serve. That will hold you back more than being slow with yourself. That is a form of bypassing. I've got to be where everyone else is. It's the keeping up. It's the spiritual keeping up with the Joneses. You are where you are. And right now I'm not ready to move forward into the next space. And if I shame myself about that, it's just going to take longer. So I get to be in a space that I held for them, that now they're holding for me. They're not in a rush. They're in a celebration. And I'm not quite there yet, and that's okay. This is powerful work. Extremely potent and powerful work. And it takes time, and it takes dedication, and it takes patience. And it's completely worth it. It's amazing work. So if you are enjoying the show, if you want access to the powerful activations like the one I'm about to do that accompany the show in a space that has some support, this is why I did this. This is why this content is gated. It's because this is potent work. And the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary is a place to receive some support while doing that work. So we're always growing and evolving as individuals and as a group space. If you'd like access to that, there is a link in the show notes for you to learn more about that. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.